Downtown Buffalo reveled in the glow of a glittering nightlife in the years just after the big war. In fact, Buffalo had some 63 theaters.
Downtown was really hopping, and we had nightclubs, we had cabarets, we had theater.
But the night scene changed after Channel 4 signed on in 1948. Uncle Milty and company found their way from the theater stages to TV studios that brought them to a burgeoning stay-at-home audience.
Hey, you know, I'm only kidding, you know that? They know it, but I don't.
Channel 4 needed the likes of an Uncle Milty to convince Western New Yorkers to make a sizable investment in their first television sets.
He sold more television sets in the early trying days of television than any single performer.
The sales curve was astronomical once Milton Berle got on. Tuesday night, you wouldn't go anywhere.
Buffalo native and radio veteran Bob Smith created afternoon magic with Howdy Doody, live from NBC studios in New York. Channel 4 carried film kinescopes of the show in 1948, before the station picked up the live network hookup from New York.
We could well have been the very first show that was ever carried by WBEN, because there was no daytime television back in 1948. It was test pattern all day long. Kids would come home from school, sit in front of the television set, watch the test pattern until I got on at 5:30 and said, "Say, kids, what time is it?" And then everybody would blast, "It's Howdy Doody time."
50 years ago, we got our first TV set, and this one was $550 because it was a 12-inch, and I was getting $85 a week. But it didn't matter with us. I mean, we had to have that television set, see?
Quint Renner came home from the war and helped his father set up a film department at the new TV operation.
We would put a test pattern on, or we would put maybe put a camera on a clock and just let the clock run all day long. Or in an exciting moment, we would stick the camera out the window and watch the traffic going up and down Delaware Avenue.
When we went on the air, you know, back in 1947, 48, there were no networks. They were struggling to get started, too.
Channel 4's first program director, Fred Keller, partnered with Ray Wander to write, produce, and direct television's first live crime drama. The Clue starred Buffalo Evening News TV critic Jim Tranter as Detective Steve Malice. Keller often appeared as one of the villains.
For heaven's sakes, Lucille, I'm your husband. I wouldn't hurt you.
Oh, please put that knife down. You know knives frighten me.
I'm only using it to illustrate a point I intend making. How easy it is to cut things away with a knife, swiftly, cleanly, and forever.
And somewhere during the show, which was a 15-minute show, a murder was committed at some time during the show, and there was always a clue that pointed directly to the murderer.
Except for one night when nobody had a clue, because Fred Keller forgot to write the last page.
Now, the final page had to contain the clue. I mean, that was the whole point.
Jim Moore remembers how an assistant in the wings handed Jim Tranter the final lines in the nick of time.
The villain, who might have been me, said, "Well, yes, I saw him, or saw her. She was wearing a pink dress." And Jimmy Tranter says, "You're lying, because in the moonlight you can't tell colors." And that was the clue.
Remember, keep your eye on the clue.
And it was all live.
You know, that was the beauty of it, Carol, because nobody knew a damn thing about television, especially the men in suits. So the creative people had a foot in the door.
Keyboard artist Harry Miller provided early Channel 4 viewers with piano portraits and vocals by Francis Foster.
I wound up doing 17 shows a week. And I was playing, the studios were in the 18th floor of the Hotel Statler. We had pianos like this in every studio, Steinways, and they were tuned every week.
Channel 4 was on its own until September of 1948, when the station joined the Midwest Network hookup.
During that time, we were using kinescopes from New York, from programs that were originating in New York. And, but we were able to take some of the programs live from Chicago.
The kinescopes were created by filming the TV shows right off the screen in New York or Chicago. Early live network programs from Chicago included Kukla, Fran, and Ollie.
And then Hollywood began releasing its films to television. You know, in the beginning, Hollywood saw TV as a tremendous threat, and no studios would lease, sell, or in any way help television.
Locally, the Stars came to meet the Millers on live television for 20 years, beginning in January of 1950. The Millers offered celebrity interviews and choice recipes from their studio kitchen.
And of course, most of the celebrities who came to town were staying at the Statler. I went in to interview Bill Holden, and he was very tired. I guess a lot of people have been interviewing him that day, and he said, "Excuse me, I got to stretch," and he climbed out the window and hung off the windowsill, which I understand he used to do a lot, but it frightened me to death. I said, "I've just killed a movie star." You know?
We were asked not to go in the studio to speak to Ginger Rogers. She didn't want to be interrupted for what she was saying. And I said to myself, the heck with that. I've loved that woman ever since I can remember. And I walked in and talked to her. She was fine.
To meet the Millers, there one time I recall the table collapsed and everything fell all over the floor. We were live, you know, all the food, and she's having conniption and he's running around and they're putting things back on the table, and they just kept right on going, live television.
Henry Chimes of Cheektowaga played accordion as the Cactus Kid on the South Park Chevrolet Barn Dance.
People used to go to neighbors to watch it because there weren't that many television sets. I tell you, that letters we got, I mean, my wife, I don't know how she stood all those letters I got from these girls, but I tell you, I got bunches, I still have them.
Fred Keller created the Santa Claus Show, which debuted in 1948 and aired from Thanksgiving to Christmas Eve for some 25 years.
Bags and bags, thousands of letters per week, you know, came into Santa Claus. You know.
The script, I wrote the script. Wrote is perhaps not the word. Designed it. There was no lines that anyone had to remember. We simply told the actors what they were supposed to do.
Ed Dinsmore filled the Santa suit until 1954, when he died of a heart attack at the age of 39. Bill Peters took up the role for the next 2 decades.
Bill was, I think, a natural comedian, and was a brilliant guy.
The unforgettable Johnny Eisenberger was Forgetful the Elf.
And Johnny Eisenberg was such a silly anyway that he'd come at you with a completely straight face. And they would say, "Oh, really? Well, we must look into that." And he had no idea what he was talking about at the time.
Gene Brooke was Grumbles.
Oh, we had a grand time doing it. As far as I was concerned, and I think Johnny felt the same way, and I think Fred did too. I think it was one of Fred's favorite programs.
Warren Jacober filled a demanding role as Freezy the Polar Bear.
Now, he was wearing a polar bear costume that we imported from Brooks Brothers in New York, the big costume house. And it weighed about 200 pounds. It was a real polar bear skin with the head and all, a ferocious looking beast. But it was so thick, the fur, that he wore nothing underneath it except his you know, jockey shorts. He perspired and lost 3 pounds every time we did the show. Anyway, in this particular show, he's supposed to be hammering on the roof, fixing a hole in the roof. And we see some snowflakes begin to flutter down. And Santa Claus, Bill Peters, who was great Santa Claus, although he hated kids, except his own, of course. And we hear the roof starting to give way.
And he slipped or something, and in this polar bear suit, he came crashing down on the floor. I thought, you know, this is the first time a polar bear was killed on television.
And then down comes Freezy, landing on Santa's desk with all this snow over him and over Santa Claus, etc. Now, you couldn't do that today. You couldn't. They wouldn't let you.
Master puppeteers Bob and Ellen Knechtel made magic for children on Channel 4 over the years.
That was on every Sunday for many years, and that was a ball.
Nancy Knechtel and her brother Bobby Jr. both helped pull the strings with their parents.
From the very beginning, we worked puppets, and I started when I was about 4 years old working puppets on the air.
That was just great. Couldn't wait for Sunday morning, after going to church.
Bob Knechtel made all the puppets and marionettes that performed in the plays, musicals, and even operas on Channel 4.
He's made hundreds of them, and they're mostly paper mache. and incredibly durable. And there are many stories of us stepping on them backstage. One time, during a live performance on TV, we broke a string, and my brother fixed it with bubble gum.
The Knechtel children provided a wardrobe of hand-me-down clothes for the puppet performers.
When we grew out of our clothing, it would be reused in a lot of cases. I was very embarrassed because one year they used the top of my bathing suit for one of the costumes.
Ted Patton designed and built magical studio sets to complete the illusion.
Saturday night, I would start to do the set and have it ready for like 2 o'clock Sunday afternoon.
The Knechtel puppets also appeared with Channel 4's Mr. Science, Virgil Booth, who hosted Fun to Learn starting in 1952. And a special marionette named Buttons was modeled after the Knechtel's son, Bobby Jr.
Bob's son, Bobby Jr., supplied Buttons his baby clothes. But we had a great time with him, didn't we?
Yeah.
Buttons, you know, or Butoni, is the oldest name for a figure in puppetry. There wasn't a name older than that.
Buttons was the sidekick for Uncle Mike Marion, who was hired in 1952 by George Torge and Fred Keller.
Fred was fun to work with, yeah. He was a little off the wall, as we all were.
Marion hosted live children's shows from 1952 through 1966.
We wanted to do a children's theater where I would be a sort of a ticket taker, and Buttons would be the little fella, sort of an usher for us.
Yeah.
Jim Moore was pulling the strings for Buttons when a chimpanzee went berserk on the set one day.
And the chimp takes one look at it and screams and backhands him and knocks him right up into the lights. Apparently, he was sitting next to an inanimate thing, and the inanimate thing came to life, and he couldn't handle it. He just belted Buttons.
It was an accident. You know that? It was an accident.
Buttons had company from Maloney the Vulture, who was named after a pet bird that actor John Barrymore kept years ago.
I've eaten in many of the best garbage cans in Buffalo. Love them, love them.
The menagerie also included Bert the Lion.
Ain't it the truth? Ain't it the truth? We would change the concept of the show. Captain Mike, when we had a tugboat or something like that, Ted would design these magnificent sets for us.
For a while, he'd be on the bow of a ship, or maybe the next 4 or 5 months, he'd be up in an attic somewhere with trunks.
Buttons is now semi-retired and resides in New York with his uncle Mike.
Listen, Channel 4, you're the light of my life. And Mike over here, he just adores you and remembers you with all happiness.
Harry Miller provided the music for young performers on live talent shows hosted by Ed Dinsmore and Jerry Brick through the 50s. Pioneer television viewers Ray and Gladys Berger remember when their daughter Arlene appeared with the family dog on Ed Dinsmore's Sunday afternoon talent show in the early 50s.
I trained the dog. She put sunglasses on and a hat and a scarf. Dog didn't mind a bit. She loved to be the typical ham, I guess.
Jerry Brick hosted Uncle Jerry's Club live from the Statler on Sunday mornings. A young Henry Pendleton was among the featured guests.
Thank you very much, Henry, and congratulations.
Oh, that was a riot. That was a funny show. Jerry didn't think so, but I did.
General Manager Les Aries launched It's Academic in the late 60s. The Tournament of Knowledge among local high schools was hosted by quizmaster Van Miller. Channel 4 had its pick of the best shows from 4 different networks from 1949 until late 1953, when the station affiliated with the Tiffany network, CBS. And what memories Channel 4 gave us over the years.
And away we go. Elvis Presley.
I killed him. Lesson to be learned in the Twilight Zone.
You and Blanche talked so much, Harry and I couldn't hear a word of it.
Oh, George, why didn't you nudge me? And Blanche and I could have talked louder.
Will you stifle?
What made you say I was 39?
Well, I've got your quarter. Let's both be happy.
Give me good night.
Well, this is something new, but I will.
Baby,
you're the greatest.
1948 was a time of vast potential and fearsome possibilities. America's young soldiers had returned home from the Second World War to begin new civilian careers, build new homes, start new families, and produce a baby boom. Air Force pilot Chuck Yeager broke the sound barrier in a plane built by Bell Aerospace in western New York. Home run king Babe Ruth took a farewell swing through Yankee Stadium before making a final run into baseball eternity. The modern nation of Israel was born. Harry Truman defied the pundits and beat New York's Republican Governor Tom Dewey in a spirited campaign for the White House. A Cold War was beginning. While the Marshall Plan healed some of the scars of World War II, the Soviet Union dropped an iron curtain on Eastern Europe. And a strange-looking piece of furniture arrived at the home of Raymond and Gladys Berger in Buffalo. It had tubes, wires, and an odd little window that could shrink the world into the Berger's living room.
The television, of course, it was in your living room, and it just sort of gobbled up the whole living room.
It was a big adventure, and it took visionaries to make it happen. Many were convinced television was only a passing fad. Buffalo Evening News editor-in-chief and WBEN president Alfred H. Kirkover was skeptical at first.
I imagine he was a little leery, you know, maybe competing with his newspaper or competing with his great radio station.
America had only 7,000 TV sets in use on November 1st, 1946. By the end of 1947, industry estimates placed the total at 175,000.
We were the pioneers. Understand now, there was only one channel, and we were it.
Seasoned radio veterans and young World War II vets teamed up to wire the 18th floor of the Hotel Statler for television. And Fred Keller provided his own brand of creative genius to the station from 1948 until 1962.
So I actually was the first program director of the station at a time when the title meant something. We actually directed programs and created them.
The first big night featured wrestling, live from Memorial Auditorium, and ventriloquist Jimmy Nelson.
In the early days of TV, getting a salary was sort of like an unexpected bonus. The toys that we had to play with, it was like being in a fun house.